Excellent. Well, I think we can begin. Thank you all for joining. I see a lot of people and a lot of familiar names and faces. So really appreciate you joining us for this first ever of our Consumer Protection Research Initiative Practitioners Forum. And so this is going to be an ongoing series of presentations of research from the Consumer Protection Research Initiative as they become available. And so we really look forward to sharing insights over the next few years. So just to note first, this meeting will be recorded, so it'll be available online later as well if you want to go back to it. During presentations, if you have questions, leave them in the chat and we will get to them at the end during the Q&A. Please mute your mics, of course, and turn off cameras to manage the conversation and also the bandwidth. And if you have any issues, you can direct message the host, the Financial Inclusion at IPA account that you see. So for those of you who are not familiar with IPA or Innovation for Poverty Action, our bread and butter is turning evidence into development outcomes. And so we start by using rigorous research methods to build a stronger evidence base, whether it's surveys, whether it's randomized control trials, whether it's new methods like what we're talking about today in terms of using new alternative data sources to better understand challenges consumers face, in this case with financial services. Then we share the evidence with people such as yourselves, and we engage with decision makers to turn this evidence into policy solutions. So we're very excited to not just share these initial findings from this pilot, but to also further the conversation with you. If you see things that are interesting, things you would like to expand on, methods that might be relevant for your market, please do let us know, and we would love to continue the conversation, because we have 4 years to improve and move the needle in consumer protection. And so this work is funded through a grant from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation that is looking to improve consumer protection through rigorous research in 4 markets, Bangladesh, Kenya, Nigeria, and Uganda. And today we'll focus on a pilot of social media data analysis in Kenya, Nigeria, and Uganda. So the other thing to know about this initiative, this Consumer Protection Research Initiative, is that we focusing on 3 main themes of challenges consumers may face with digital financial services. And when I say digital financial services, I mean things like mobile money, online banking, digital credit, all those new products that are expanding access and choice, but come with new risks that maybe are slightly different from the traditional in-person branch-based models. So the first thing is fraud in digital finance. I think all of us have probably at some time received fraudulent messages from someone purporting to be our bank, needing to reset our PIN or update our account information and kindly share with me your account number and PIN, or saying it was someone who sent you money by mistake and needs you to send it back. These things happen. And so we want to understand, why are they happening and who is able to identify these versus who may fall victim, and so how can we help them? And this ties into the second theme, which is insufficient consumer redress in digital products. So even when something goes wrong and it's not your fault, it's not always easy, we find, to get solutions, as the data from this analysis of social media will show. So we want to leverage these new digital channels to create better consumer redress mechanisms, to meet consumers where they're now transacting in a more efficient and effective manner. And the third area is around product information and choice. So this really is about, how do we make product terms more transparent, comparable, and how do we use things like data sharing or data portability to increase the ability of consumers to leverage their new digital footprints to receive perhaps multiple competing offers in real time to expand choice. And so this first phase of research, which this presentation is part of, is really about building new market monitoring data and analysis tools. So this can include working with administrative data, such as transaction level data of mobile payments. It can also be surveys. We have several surveys in the field asking consumers what they've experienced, what they've seen. And then using these new channels such as social media to better monitor consumer experience, which we'll present today. And then we're hoping to take this initial evidence base and not just say what's wrong or what could be improved, but now test ways to improve upon and develop solutions for these challenges. So we will have a competitive research fund, which will launch in early 2021, that I hope people will consider applying to, where we will be able to fund rigorous experiments to test solutions. For example, if we see problems with certain consumer segments suffering as victims of fraud, we could test new interventions to raise awareness of fraud prevention or to monitor fraud in those segments. So we're quite excited. This is just the start of the journey, and please be on the lookout for the proposal. And if you have any ideas, you want to bounce off of IPA, or you want to find a researcher to connect with, we have a great network of researchers. So please do reach out to us at thefinancialinclusion@povertyaction.org email address. So as I mentioned, this practitioners forum, this is the first of what we hope will be many. And this comes out of your feedback. We surveyed people from across several emerging markets we work in. And one of the main things we heard from them is that they really wanted webinars on applied research in markets like theirs. And so that's where we're focusing on these webinars, sharing out results. And they don't even have to be final results, but sharing out, even if it's preliminary results, to inspire replication or similar studies in other markets. Because we want to promote knowledge sharing and collaboration, not just in the 4 markets this fund is covering, but in other markets as well. And so the main things you can expect from these this practitioners forum is research briefs. So we'll be sharing them as they come, these webinars certainly, and then workshops, either virtual or perhaps sometime in the future in person. So we look forward to engaging on this, and we'll be sending out periodic notifications. So make sure you've accepted the email, the permission to email you when you signed up, so that you're on IPA's mailing list for this information. And finally, just to highlight what's coming soon. So we're very excited to share a draft of our review of the evidence to date on consumer protection in low-income countries. So there's a link on this slide, but also we're posting a link in the chat right now where you can look at a draft of a white paper that is exploring what does the evidence say so far, and where are the research gaps in consumer protection. We're very excited to announce the next 2 webinars. At the end of October, we're going to be presenting a very interesting case from Uganda, where Matthew Bird and colleagues looked at 2 years worth of complaints data in digital financial services. So millions of customer care records, and have analyzed those and are going to share what you can learn from looking at complaints data in large volumes. And then in December, we'll be sharing the results from consumer protection surveys in Kenya, Nigeria, and Uganda. My colleagues Shana Warren and Willie Blackman will be sharing that. So stay tuned for more after today. In today's agenda, we're going to have a 35-minute presentation from Danny Madrid-Morales and Melissa Tully, and then Marayo Adebayo from the Federal Competition Consumer Protection Commission in Nigeria will share the perspective of a practitioner on how they leverage social media and what more they may use, how they may want to leverage social media further in the future for market conduct supervision. And then we'll have a Q&A. So you can post, as I said, your questions in the chat as we go along, and we will try to get to them best we can. If we can't get to all of them, we can follow up later with you. So now I will turn it over to my presenters. As I mentioned, our discussant will be Marayo Adebayo. She's the technical assistant to the CEO of the Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Commission of Nigeria, who are probably doing social media in as big a way as I've seen of any regulator. I think they have a Twitter handle with 100,000 followers, and she can share some interesting perspectives of how they're using social media to fulfill their consumer protection mandate. And then we have Danny Madrid-Morales, Assistant Professor of Journalism at the University of Houston, and Melissa Tully, Associate Professor at the School of Journalism and Communications, the University of Iowa. And so they're going to present right now their findings from the research. So I will stop sharing my screen and I will turn it over to them. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody, at least here in Houston. So I'll be taking over from Ray for the first half of this presentation, and then I'll let my colleague, Melissa Tully, to continue afterwards. And here's a little bit what we want to discuss or introduce to you this in this webinar. We want to sort of give you an overview of why we think that social media data can be useful to answer some of the questions you might have about consumer behavior and about particularly in the countries that we are studying. I'll give you a brief context of the study that we conducted, and then I'll provide you a quick overview of the methods that we used in this study, and then I'll hand over to my colleague, Melissa Tully, who will give you some insights from what we found in the preliminary data of this study. So, one of the important advantages of using social media data as opposed to other types of data collection methods is that we can get information about consumers' opinions, attitudes, and behaviors in a direct way without having to ask them directly. And the advantage of doing that is that we know for a fact that sometimes survey research, for example, leads to not particularly accurate data because it's respondents who self-report their behaviors, while on social media you are able to observe these behaviors directly, and that gives you an advantage over other types of research methods. So when you have collected social media data, and I'll explain how we did that and how you can do that yourself for your own work, there's a few advantages to doing so, right? And one of them is that you can turn this data and incorporate into things such as real-time monitoring of issues and events by collecting data from social media, and that can be Twitter, it can be Facebook, it can be whatever social media platform that is more popular in your country. You're able to monitor things real time and see whether the spikes in certain types of complaints that are in need of being addressed real time. It's also important because, as Rafe was mentioning earlier, many of the actions that we might take are done through experiments where you design interventions and then you test them with a subsample of the population. You can incorporate some of the social media data into that process, and then that helps you inform better your experiments that you might do to try to test different communication strategies or different actions to reduce the amount of problems that users have using financial services online. If you're able to collect large amounts of data, you can also do what we would call predictive modeling, meaning that you can incorporate some of the information to try to foresee at what point some issues will become more prominent. Maybe by monitoring some keywords, you're able to see that, well, in the next few weeks, this is gonna become a big issue. Maybe we should intervene beforehand, right? So that's the advantage of using social media data. And what we wanted to do with this study is try to show you how that would work in a real case scenario. And for that, we work with CityBeats, which is a social data platform. It's a company that helps us collect data and then analyze it with their own algorithms and different strategies. And we were able to work with them with the specific goal of this study, which is to understand what are the types of problems that are faced by digital finance consumers. And that's actually quite important because when you collect data, and I'll explain in a minute how you collect that data, you want to target specifically your data collection to the problem that you're trying to answer, right? So it's not that we just log into Facebook and collect everything that's out there. We are very specifically targeting the kind of question that we had for this study, which was how can we better understand the types of problems that users have with digital finance. For this study, we collected data from Nigeria, Kenya, and Uganda because all three countries are multilingual countries, as you probably know. What we did is we collected data in multiple languages rather than using just English as the language that maybe it's shared across all three countries. And that helped us get a lot more insight because, as you probably know, not all social media use is done in English. And the advantage of using working with CityBeats was that their algorithms were able to incorporate these multiple languages in a way that helps substantially with the analysis. We collected data from three sources, that's Twitter, Facebook public pages, and Google Play Store. And let me stop here for a second to help you all understand how we did this. We only collected data that is publicly available, right? So we do not have access and we do not intend to collect personal data from any of the users, but we are able to collect on Twitter anything that somebody posts on their timeline. And when we comes to Facebook, we can go to public pages. That's no private groups, no closed groups. It's only publicly available information. And then on Google Play Store, we found out that there's quite a bit of number of users that when they download an app on the Google Play Store, that's for users who have an Android phone, they leave comments not just about the app, but also about their experience with either the app or the provider that is providing such an app. So by collecting data from all these resources, we are able to get sort of a full picture of what is going on social media. And our study goes all the way back to July 1st, 2019. So it covers 12 months of data. And that means, and obviously that was not intended, that we are able to cover half of a year that is non-COVID year. And we all know what COVID made to many parts of society, right? So it also affected the use of digital finance services. And we are able to compare user behavior before and after COVID. And part of the results that we'll be presenting today show you how many differences there are between the pre and post-COVID, and might help you get ideas on what kind of issues you can monitor with social media. So we do this in 4 stages. The first stage is we collect large amounts of data. And when I'm talking about large amounts, we're talking about millions of data points. After that, we determine which are the topics that we want to explore. So we work with researchers in each of the countries, and we determine which are the topics that we want to explore in the data. And then the way we convert our data into topics, and we are able to classify each of the tweets or each of the Facebook posts into topics, is by looking at word frequencies and probabilities. And I'll give you an example in a minute of how this works exactly. And at the last point, we're able to incorporate metadata. That's additional information that is not easily available on the tweets, that helps us better understand behaviors, such as, are there gender differences? Are there geographical differences between urban centers and rural areas? And all of these things are done just by collecting social media data. That's sort of the beauty of this approach. So more specifically, how did we do this? We collected approximately 4.5 million social media messages, and that includes the 3 platforms that I was mentioning from. And we did so by looking at the specific handles or the specific usernames of 4 types of actors. So we looked at commercial banks, and here you have a few examples of the commercial banks that we looked to, and we have dozens of different commercial banks. We also incorporated data from telecommunication companies that are offering mobile money services. That's a smaller number, but quite a significant amount of messages come from this group. We also have data from fintech startups that are offering either lending or payment options. And we also have a small number, but a quite significant number of microfinance institutions. And here I am providing you just examples of some of these institutions. There's more. And when the report becomes available, you can see the whole list of all the users that we collect the data from, right? So the way this works is we would get all the mentions of any of these companies or institutions, and then all the users' interactions with these companies. And that amounted to about 4.5 million points of data. Of those 4.5 million points of data, we only analyzed a percentage that had enough information for us to be able to make sense of it. So in case of Facebook, that's about 42% of the messages that we collected were analyzed. And you can see here an example of the kind of data that we are looking at, right? So that's a comment to a post by the Equity Bank in Kenya. In the case of Twitter, we collected a little bit more than 1.8 million tweets, I remember. And then 85% of those are the ones that we analyzed. And then we analyzed 40% of the messages that we got from the Play Store. So that's our data set. How did we come and get our insights? We took what we call a top-down and bottom-up combination of approaches. And let me explain exactly what we mean by that. So the first thing that we do, and that's our top-down approach, we, as researchers in collaboration with experts from each of the countries, we decided what are the topics that we wanted to explore. And specifically, we explore these 7 topics. That's operational failures, consumer care, fees and charges, fraud, data privacy, lending, and advertising. And we specifically look for messages and content that was able, where we could classify into those categories. And to do that, I'll explain that we use keywords for each of the topics. And then in addition to that, we also took a bottom-up approach. And that means that after we had classified all of our messages into these different categories, We also look at the data specifically using a combination of what we call cluster analysis, and we also look at humans looking at some of the data, and we're able to identify some subtopics, and that's useful for some down the line analysis. So how does this exactly work? Let me show you the example of how we go from the social media data to specifically insights and data we can analyze, right? So imagine we are looking at the case of fees and charges, and we started by looking or creating a list of keywords, or we call seed words, that we know for a fact are related to fees and charges, such as fees, charges, overcharge, refund, deduction. The next step is that we are able to grab one specific tweet. In this case, here's the text of the tweet. And then we identify a keyword. In our case, it's refund. But we're not only looking at this keyword, but we're also looking at the words that happen around this keyword, such as my money, what happened today negative, return my funds. And using machine learning, our algorithm learns these words. And when we show the algorithm a new tweet that doesn't have the keyword, right, we're able to still classify these tweets as belonging to the fees and charges category because they have the same words that this other tweet we use in the learning process. So by doing this, one, we're able to collect data in multiple languages. Here you see we have words that are not in English, and we are learning them, even though they were not in our C word category. And we're also able to expand as new words come into our area. Now, finally, in addition to that, right, so we are able to classify all of the data that we have into different topics. We also can use what we call metadata to add extra detail, right? So this is a random tweet that I pulled from the Twitter API, that's a platform. And then here you don't see any information about gender or location, but in fact, behind this tweet, there's a whole bunch of metadata that gives us additional information. Like in this case, it tells us specifically from Washington, DC. We can use this data and extract it from the platform and do things such as locate each of the tweets or many of them. We can also locate what device, whether it was a mobile phone, whether it was an Android or iPhone. And then we can also go beyond that, and in some cases look at the gender of the user and try to see whether there's gender differences, or maybe iPhone users and Android users use their complaints are different one from the other, right? So all of this data is what we collected, and now we are ready to see how we inputted that into our analysis. Before we do that, I think we could stop for a second and get your feedback for a minute. If you now look at your screens, you'll see a poll popping up on your screen. And we'd like to ask you to answer these 3 questions briefly, and I'll let you answer them, and then I'll review the results when you finish voting. If you don't see the poll, you should see at the bottom of the screen of your Zoom, there's a button that says polling, in case the pop-up menu didn't work on your end. Some of you are mentioning that if you say no to the first question, you don't have option to answer the other 2 questions. So those of you who said no to the first question, you don't have to answer questions 2 and 3. So based on what we are seeing here, right, the large majority of you have known somebody or have used yourself social media data to voice your opinions about services. And in most of the cases, as you can probably see, and maybe we can end the poll now so that everybody can see the results at this point, most of you had a negative experience when you voiced your opinion on this matter. And in most cases, as you can see now on your screen, the provider did not even respond to your concern, right? So, oh, sorry, yes, most of the cases the provider did not respond. So here we can see clearly that there might be a need for us to improve some of this interaction between consumers and companies, and maybe some of the results that we're going to present next can help shed some light on how that can be done. And I'll let my colleague Melissa Tully take over from here.
Hi, everyone. I am going to run through the preliminary results from the analysis that Danny just shared with you. So I'm going to talk about what we actually learned from our data collection and analysis. I'm not going to cover everything. There's a lot in here, and as Danny suggested, you can really start breaking the data down to analyze it on a granular level and to break it down by different groups. So I'm going to focus kind of on some of the overview findings, and I'm going to talk about the COVID-19 split, because it is quite an interesting natural, breaking point, and there were some very interesting changes that that we saw. So first thing I want to talk about is how users used the platforms. So as you recall, we're collecting data from Twitter, Facebook, and the Google Play Store. So on Twitter and Facebook, we saw that they are mostly used for consumer protection issues. And you'll see in a second, I'll put up a slide that shows you the other categories again, particularly raising points about customer care. So when people are posting in these platforms, they're talking about customer care, often about themselves and the issues that they've faced. So you can see here from this graph, the green is customer care. And you can see on Twitter and on Facebook that that is the most common category of issues. So this is across the 3 markets. So this is across Kenya, Uganda, and Nigeria. At some points I will show you country specific, but for now this is across the 3 combined. So you can see on Twitter it's about 50% of the posts, and on Facebook, it's even higher, closer to 60%. So people in this, and when they're posting about this, they're complaining about response times and unresponsiveness and issues that involve, customer care and relationship between them and the provider. Google Play Store's reviews are slightly different. So you have your kind of general app reviews where people are talking about the quality of the various apps. Those actually tended to be more positive. So people, commenting on the quality. We're not as interested in just the, saying things like, yay, great app. We're interested in kind of what the detailed comments are. So when we look at the issues that we're interested in, those topics, we see that operational failure is the most common issue on Google Play. And so operational failure can be broken down. So as I said, remember, you can break the data down more and more and more. So when we break down the operational failures category, we see that transaction errors are the most common operational failure reported. So the graph on the bottom there is breaking down that operational failures category even further. And you can see on the bluish bar, almost 20% of the operational failure reports are transaction errors. And then you can see the next closest is that the service isn't working or the app isn't working. So within each bigger category, we can break down into these smaller issues and topics to really understand what does it mean when consumers are talking about operational failures. What does that actually look like? So these subgroupings are very informative for thinking about how to utilize this data for, thinking about insights. So what can the providers learn about how their tools and services are working? So that is an overview of what the social media users are saying. So that is how folks are actually responding and posting on these platforms. But we also know how the various providers respond. And so if you remember, we have banks in here, we have telecom companies, fintechs, we have all kinds of different providers. And what we can learn here is, one, how they respond overall, but then again, you can break it down by the different segments as well. You could break it down by provider types if you wanted to. Okay, so Here, again, you see just from this brief summary here that response rates vary considerably. I'm going to show you a graph in a minute that I'll break down in some detail across these platforms. Now, what we mean here is the public response. So this is what we can see in terms of what the account, the provider account responds publicly. So this is a lot. I will go through this slowly, so don't feel overwhelmed. One of the biggest things you need to look at here is the percentage. So you have to look at the axis here to see on Twitter, for example, the response rate. Now, again, this is the public response rate, so we can gather it by looking at what the account said publicly, forward facing for everyone to see. The response rate is quite small. You can see it only goes up to 3.5%. Whereas if you look at Facebook and Google Play, it's much higher. It goes up to 25% for Facebook and nearly 60% for Google Play. So this is what we can see in terms of what the providers have said publicly. So by that, we mean for Twitter, those are the comments that are publicly viewable. For Facebook, it's at least one reply. And for Google Play, it's at least one reply. So you can also see on these graphs that we broke it down by country. As I mentioned, you can do that, right? So we could talk in aggregate all 3 countries or break it down. Here we've broke it down by country and by type of provider. So you can really start making comparisons across and within types. One of the interesting things here that we think, so it was very surprising to us that the response on Twitter was so low. So we were wondering and thinking through why that might be. And one of the reasons that we are exploring in more depth now is that it seems to be on Twitter that the conversations move to a private chat more often. So we looked for things like the letters DM for direct message. So if a provider says DM us, then we don't count that here as a public response because they have moved that conversation to a private channel. And so when we actually look at the data, I'm not putting up a graph for this, but I'll just tell you the numbers. We see that nearly 55% have some indicator that they've moved to a private channel. Now, we don't have access to that data, right? Because we are only looking at the publicly available data. So we're speculating a little bit there, but it seems to be that may be what's going on Twitter and why we're seeing a much lower response rate on Twitter. When we now think about the content of these replies on Twitter, again, it's a smaller sample, so keep these things in mind every time we're talking about breaking the data down in different ways too, where we're talking about different numbers. But when we look at Twitter, those replies are more concentrated on the customer care issues, which aligns with what we saw in the kinds of comments that people are making. However, on Facebook and Google Play, they're actually more distributed across those different types of issues. And when I say issues, it's the same ones that we've been talking about: operational care, operational failures, customer care, fees and charges. So the same issues, but across the different platforms. So if we look here, this is Twitter and Facebook public pages. So as I said, on Twitter, it's more concentrated on customer care. Again, that green bar shows you that it's more concentrated. Please note the y-axis, right? The response rate is still small. We're still only in the 3% range. If you look at Facebook, again, the response rate is much higher. So that axis is showing you up, you can see it goes up to 80%. That it's much more distributed. Those bars are kind of all over. And you can see in some countries, for example, in Kenya, lending is the highest, right? Whereas in Nigeria, it's much more evenly distributed. And in Uganda, lending is also the highest. So this is the content, the type of reply. If we move to Google Play, I'm going to show you that one next. And please note the legend at the bottom. This is slightly different. So here we're just looking at operational failures and positive and negative feedback. You can see it's more spread out, but operational failure is, still a high category, which makes sense given that that's the kind of posts that people are making. They're asking or commenting on the app and other operations. Okay, so those are our kind of overview results, I want to dig in a little bit to the COVID-19 results, given I'm sure everyone's interest in COVID-19 and what that's meant for your own life, but also for your professional life. So these are changes that we saw at a breaking point that we set in mid-March. I believe it was around March 11th when it was when COVID was deemed a global pandemic. And so lots of countries went into shutdown, various kinds of things happened. So what do we see here? We see that the use of these channels to communicate with financial providers increased across the 3 markets after the pandemic. So again, we had to pick a date. So it's not a perfect date, but you can see here, this is just Twitter in that line. That's when we're using as our outbreak and lockdown line. You can see after that period in Kenya, which is at the top, a huge, you can see that it kind of goes down, but then goes back up. Nigeria, Uganda, we see similar kinds of trends where things kind of go down and then go back up. Please note that the colors remain the same. So green is customer care. So there's no legend on this page. And don't worry too much about what each of these issues are. We just want you to see the general pattern. On Facebook, you can see as well the change. Facebook is really interesting, I think, at the top there. You can see that it's in Kenya, it's above where we had seen it prior. And you can see here, if you go back to the beginning of July 1, the changes are quite dramatic. And Google Play, you see something slightly different again, where it kind of goes down and then back up. So we know overall, just looking at the numbers, that there was an increase in interactions. Okay, so and this is true across all countries. One of the ideas here, one of the things we're speculating is more people were moving towards using digital tools during this time, right? So they're not going to the bank location, they're not going to the ATM or whatever it is. So they are using the apps more, and they're using social channels more to communicate. So when we think about the actual issues themselves, the distribution of those issues did not change. So even though there were more overall, people are still generally talking about the same things in the same percentage. So people are still talking about, consumer care, operational failure, things like that. But one of the things that was quite interesting, if we dig into the data a little bit more, which I'll just tell you the takeaway, I'm not going to show you a graph, that the proportion of comments related to operational failure, so remember that category can be broken down into subcategories, operational failures around mobile money increased and comments about ATMs decreased, which makes a lot of sense given that people are not probably going out to the ATM or to the bank. So we see, even though it's in the same category, the subcategory has changed. Another interesting thing that we can look at, and we do this here, is look at demographic differences. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a second. What we saw here is that on Twitter, women in Nigeria significantly increased their complaints. So let me show you this graphic in a little bit more detail. But women, their complaints went up about fraud compared to men. And in Uganda, customer care reports went up for women. So if that's the same information that I just had on the other slide, but I want to show you a graphic. So if we see here, this is again COVID-19. So we can see in the 2 circles there, in Nigeria, the big change, the females are the blue. You can see there's a large increase in women talking about fraud. And in Uganda, you can see a large increase in women talking about customer care. So there's some interesting changes that we've seen around COVID. Okay, so those are our preliminary results. And again, we are still analyzing the data and working through this large data set. So we love comments and questions and feedback. But one thing that I want to talk a little bit about now are the tools. So as Danny mentioned, and as you saw in our slides, we worked with City Beats to access and analyze our social media data. So this is just a screenshot of their dashboard where the data is imported and analyzed. So we can make all different kinds of graphs. We can look at things in different, we can group things together in different ways. So we're able to use this dashboard to actually generate insights around the data. And this is based on their machine learning, their algorithms, the things that they have built into their system. We now also have the raw data, and we're doing additional analysis on that data as well. There are other tools available. So I just want to briefly mention some of these if you're thinking about for your own work or some interest that you might have. So all social media platforms have analytics built in. We'll show you screenshots in a second. So you can download and access data from your own company through your Twitter dashboard, your Facebook dashboard, whatever platforms you use. Those come with it. Of course, they're limited insofar as they're only your data. There are lots of external tools and services available, but some of them are very expensive, and you have to buy a subscription or pay for the service, for a monthly access or whatever it might be. So if you're thinking about doing that, you'll need to think about your budget and how you want to include this kind of service in your overall planning. And all have limitations. So even the best tools have limitations. Some of those limitations are based on what the social media companies allow you to do, like what data you can get. And other limitations are just based on the way that the data is processed and how the data is analyzed. So just really quickly, Twitter analytics kind of looks like this. And you can download all of your data and you can run your own analysis on it. So all of these have exportable data. Facebook data looks like this. Again, you can download it. These are free. They come with having an account. And then an example of a commercial tool, one you would pay for, Brandwatch. Again, it would cost money to have access to this, but you could get more data across more platforms similar to the kind of thing we did. Again, you can export the data and do your own analysis as well as run analysis within the tools. Okay, to wrap up, so on this large scale, the way that we are looking at data, social media offers a rich source of consumer protection data. You can gather and analyze it to learn about customers. So as we're doing in these 3 markets, but of course you could do this in any market, and you could do it in even, smaller, looking at cities or various ways of kind of looking at this data. So on the large scale, you're able to do that. On a smaller scale, if you are thinking about your own bank or if you're a regulator or whatever it might be, you can still gather data and analyze it to glean insights. So you're not going to be able to do the level of analysis that we're doing with millions of data points, but you can still gather insights and start understanding what are your clients and customers talking about, what keywords, as Danny mentioned, come up together. Right. So when people say this, what else are they saying, and what can we learn about that? So there's still things you can gather and learn about on a smaller level. And then finally, which is most important, I think the biggest takeaway for everybody thinking about where you fit in this puzzle is that the data reveals patterns in both the complaints and responses. So we see the interaction between the providers and the customers that can be used to inform decision-making about how to deal with customer complaints, what to post, how to direct people to message you, various things like that. So we believe that this data can be used to help make better decisions going forward, both on how to use your social media, but also more broadly on strategies for engaging with customers. Okay, you're gonna have one more Zoom poll before we wrap up. So please, this is just a one question. So please answer the poll here. Excellent. So as the data is coming in, we're seeing about 56% folks are saying that they're at their organization, someone is in charge or a person is in charge of social media monitoring. So almost up to 60% now. So great. So we do have folks here who do this kind of work or who are at least beginning to think about how to use social media for this kind of work. I'm going to end the poll so that we can see the results here. So we ended up with about 58% of organizations who have a person or a team working in social media, and 32% who don't, and about 11% who aren't sure. So there are opportunities here for thinking about how to engage your team or how to put together a person or a team to start analyzing and gathering this data. Okay, that is all for the formal presentation from our end. I want to make sure we do thank City Beats again for their work on gathering the data and doing this preliminary analysis. I am now going to mute myself and, and stop sharing so we can hear back from our discussant.
Excellent. Let me just pull up this and then we can go. Okay. Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, Melissa and Danny. I mean, who said consumer protection wasn't cool? I mean, I think this is really amazing stuff, and I'm so excited to see the preliminary findings and to see, you know, all the things we can dig deeper on as well. So I want to move from academia to the regulatory world, and so I asked Mariah to join us to share her perspective, because the Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Commission of Nigeria has a particular interest in the digital economy and in fintech and consumer protection, and also are very active on social media. I'm really impressed with how they've been using this tool to engage with consumers. So I have a few questions from Mariah, and then I see a ton of questions from the group. So hopefully we can get to those as well. So the first, Mariah, I just think it would be great if you could share a bit of how the FCCPC has been building your social media presence, and how you've been using it for your consumer protection mandate, if there's any particular aspects of the digital economy where you've been using social media.
Hi, Rafe. Thank you very much for that question. I think first of all, I'll lay a foundation about how we see our mandate. Our mandate is the protection of consumers, which basically means all of Nigerian people. And we've come to recognize that social media, it's a small percentage of Nigerians that are on social media, but that percentage is a very powerful, chunk of the population, because to some extent, they are like the influencer population. So they have sort of influence over other people around them who may not be on social media. So capturing those people is quite a priority for us. And second thing is that we recognize that to be effective in the work that we do, people have to know us. And so social media for us is, one, a method of raising awareness about the agency. Secondly, is a tool or a resource to address complaints. Thirdly, it's a place to disseminate information to the public, and then a place to educate and a place to engage. So for us, in terms of harvesting complaints, we find that our being active on social media, particularly Facebook and Twitter, tends to put service providers on their toes, because they know that the moment that we're tagged in a tweet, we will respond, and they don't want us to respond before them, so they want to respond first. So typically we found that even when we haven't responded, a response has come from the provider, which is great. It's great for the consumer and it's great for us, because it reduces our workload and also the consumer gets a response. And then secondly is that it helps us see patterns and trends in the types of complaints that people have to deal with. And it also helps us to project, to plan, and it helps us to, based on the type of complaint that there might be, it helps us to decide what will be the best approach in addressing the issue. Sometimes it may mean that we have to do broader investigations. Sometimes it may mean that we need to scapegoat, so maybe we move on to prosecution or some form of sanctioning. Sometimes it may mean that people are not very well sensitized about the issue, and so we just need to educate more. So it really just helps us to feel the pulse.
It seems like we lost Morayo.
Yeah, Mariah, are you back? Not sure if we such a wonderful response and insights. Well, hopefully Mariah can connect again in the next minute or two. Maybe while we wait, Johan, do you want to, should we perhaps raise one of the questions from the group? There's a lot of them, so we'll probably have to follow up on most of these by, maybe we can send responses to the questions to all the participants after, but perhaps we can address one or two while we wait for Mariah to connect back.
Yeah. So one of the first questions that we got was, how do you ensure that the consumer feels heard when you're working with the data on the back end and not responding and interacting in real time? And I guess that's a question for the researchers.
Thank you, Barbara, for that question. I think that one possible approach for that, and we know that some institutions have been using that, is maybe using chatbots. You can incorporate some of this data you're monitoring real time into a chatbot that provides automatic answers while you are working on a solution to their issue. Or definitely you can also provide very short answers. And we've seen that in our data where some of the companies provide very sort of standard answers. Thank you, we'll look into that, or DM us. So very automated responses that give the consumer the sense that they're being heard at the same time that you're monitoring the data.
So someone else asked if Ida April, and I don't want to butcher their name, but in the view of research, wouldn't it be selection bias if you only include public posts? And if it is a selection bias, how do you minimize it?
That's actually a very good question and a tricky one. Melissa, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, so there's always trade-offs. One of the trade-offs with social media data, and Mariah was getting at this in her comments, is it's not everybody. So it's not representative of the population in any way. And so these are that's one of the, well, I shouldn't say in any way, it's not representative of your entire population. And we know, for example, that there's more young urban people on a lot of these platforms than older or rural dwellers, right? So we already have some limitations. So those are things we address. But in terms of the public versus private, you actually, and someone asked about the ethics of this later down, so maybe I'll address that as well with the IRB. You really cannot gather private data without explicit permission from the participants. So if I wanted your chats, for example, on Facebook, I'd have to ask you, to share those. I can't go in and take those. That would be a real problem. So we are only seeing what people are willing to post publicly, which means we don't know if they go straight to a direct message. So there is bias there. However, what we are trying to do by gathering, and Danny can jump in here if you would like, by gathering so much data, is that we're still able to see trends with this very, very large data set. And we are being very explicit that we're only looking at public commentary. There's also limitations on what the social media companies will let you gather. So you have both ethical concerns from the social media companies and from our institutional review boards. So the IRB question, collecting public data is usually considered fine, and we're not sharing names, things like that, right? We're not saying, you know, the person, we don't have access to the person. So we just have access to the comment. So we are trying to balance privacy and ethical concerns with data quality. So those are really good questions. Danny, do you want to jump in on that?
I think that Mariah's back, so I'll let her provide some insights maybe.
Yeah, so Mariah, I'm sorry we lost you, and God, that was such a wonderful answer and really inspiring about how your simple things like having consumers tag you on gets better responses. I mean, that's a lesson every regulator can apply. So I want to hear, you know, you've seen the data and analysis that Melissa and Danny have worked on, and the tools that are available. From your perspective, I mean, how do you think those tools could be useful for you as a regulator looking into consumer protection? And are there further insights or analysis you would want to see from this line of research?
Okay, thank you. I should say that that was a great presentation. I mean, because I was just looking at the categories that you guys are working with: operational fees and charges and customer issues. And really some of the types of issues that we deal with here, especially when it comes to fintech, fees and charges are always all over the place, and the operational fee definitely. So it was really exciting to see how that, research pulls in all that data around that. And I've already pictured what we can do with that type of information. What was interesting to me was also the fact that you were able to sieve out, you know, reactions of women versus reactions of men. Can everyone hear me? Okay, what's going on again? Hi. Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah. So what was interesting was also that we're able to see reactions of women versus reaction of men. You know, that we're able to see it along those demographics is really useful for us, because sometimes some sects of the population are more vulnerable than some. So that kind of information was plan what type of improved protection or what type of obligations we need to impose on providers when, you know, we're dealing with a more vulnerable sector. So what I would be interested in seeing would be perhaps more analysis around how younger population, you know, react to these types of fintech opportunities that are available on the palm of their hands, because these are inexperienced people who are not necessarily able to make informed decisions. And so if there's some data coming out of that that helps, you know, predict what type of protection these groups of people need, that would be really helpful. Another thing that's really to see is that, I mean, the patterns are not isolated from country to country. So it just borders the fact that we're human beings and we, you know, sort of behave the same across the board. I want to comment on the post-COVID. We also recognize that there was an increase in consumer on social media, you know, during the COVID lockdown. And what I would guess would be responsible for that is that perhaps, you know, customers downside in terms of number of staffing that go in. So definitely responsible from those places will be slower than, you know, what consumers were used to before. Some walking centers were shut down. The telephone lines were manned by less people, so you have a lot of old years. So people just more frustrated on social media to say, look, I've been trying to reach you guys, I can't reach you guys, the experience on social media. And here, so it's just interesting stuff that we can do a lot with.
Sorry, Mariah. Okay. I got most of that towards the end. So it seems like there is one, this is being used by regulators and financial service providers already. And two, this further level of analysis that Danny and Melissa are engaging on could be useful. And I'm particularly excited, like you, about looking at the COVID-19 aspects of this. I realize we're running out of time. And so I think, we won't keep people long, but what I would propose we do, as I mentioned, make sure you've opted in to receive emails from us, because what we can do is we can take these questions and we can go through them one by one, because there are a lot of really nice specific questions on methodology and things like that, and applicability for supervision. So we will take our time to respond to those and follow up on this. And there will be more to come on this research, as you know, Danny and Melissa have just begun, and they will have publications coming out in the future on this. And we also are all available to speak further with those who have interest in exploring these methods in their jurisdictions, with their consumers, with the market they oversee. So thank you all so much for your time, and thank you so much, Marayo, Danny, and Melissa, for just a wonderful presentation and discussion. I'm leaving this really, really inspired. And I hope others are. And we look forward to continuing this conversation and to seeing you all at the next webinar on the use of complaints data from customer care records in Uganda in end of October. All right, thank you all so much.
Thanks, everyone.